bring any copies of your book?
I do actually have copies of the chapbook. Again, I don't know when the full length will actually come out, but I do have the chapbook if anybody wants it. Anything else?
So, I consider myself a pretty good songwriter, but not a very good poet. And I'm just wondering in the process with poets, because I kind of think of a melody in my head and everything has to fit that in terms of rhythm and notes or whatever. But when you start a poem, is there like a sound or something that you go to, or you just go with the writing and the idea?
I actually like writing formal poetry because it gives me that kind of structure as a starting point. And the story about working on a poem as I was pushing the stroller up the world's steepest hill is actually pretty representative. That a lot of my poem writing starts not sitting in front of a piece of paper. It's I come up with a line, and then I want to figure out how do I build a poem around that line, because I think it's a great line. And maybe it's not the closing line, but maybe it's a turning line. And I want to build from there and then decide what should come before it to set up for that line. So what can I actually hold in my head while I'm walking and not writing things down? Like maybe 2 lines, maybe 4 if I just then repeat them all the way home so that I can write them down. But sometimes it's just those 2, and that's the start that you kind of build around. So it's not particularly linear considering how linear a sonnet seems. Rhyme scheme too, I'm super flexible about. Like, okay, so if I'm writing a sonnet about Edna St. Vincent Millay, I might use the Petrarchan form because she used it a lot, and surprisingly well considering how constricting it is. But normally it's like, no, I do want there to be rhyme, but I can sort of finesse that later. Like, it's more important to me to get in some words that I think are key or interesting or that sound right or that sound musical when you read them aloud. Like, okay, so I did trip over my own tongue once there, but only once, in all that time. So that's also indicative of the kind of musical mindset about the craft.
Are you a musician?
I am, yes, but not really an instrumentalist, a singer. So
It makes sense.
it's true. It's funny though, because as a singer, I'm terrible at memorizing lyrics. Like, really bad. I have to work at it very hard, and in my adulthood, I did theater, and that was the most stressful part of it. So now I mostly just sing with music in front of me because that just makes it so much more enjoyable not to have to memorize words. I'm always super impressed by writers who can get up and declaim their poetry in a truly performative kind of way. I can't do it. It stresses me out terribly.
Once you have an idea for a poem, how many revisions does it go through?
Because I write so slowly, it actually doesn't necessarily get revised at all. Again, the poem that took me 4 years to write, part of that was not writing it, but also it's indicative of the fact that often I'll work on something and then kind of slowly work on it some more, and slowly work on it some more, and like, I really need time often to put it together. So the poem that I just wrote on Saturday, I don't know, maybe I'll decide a week from now that it has all kinds of problems and I'll never do anything with it and just throw it in a drawer. But in general, it's a super slow process, and it will only be maybe when I'm putting together poems for a collection or deciding maybe I want to submit this somewhere, where I'll look hard at it and say, actually, that one rhyme has always felt false. That's always bothered me, and I just pretended that it didn't, and so I'll have enough distance on it that I can tweak that one thing, or if I present something to my writing group, and they all hate this one thing in the poem, I'll think, okay, I need some distance, and then I'll come back and revisit that and see if I hate it too, and maybe fix it. But I don't do a lot of revising with this kind of writing because it's so precise that you can't tweak one thing without wrecking rhythm, or somebody's got too many syllables in the line, or you ruin the rhyme scheme, or it's suddenly more of a slant rhyme. Do you really want that there? So it's not the kind of craft that lends itself to a lot of revision.
Sort of touching on that, we've talked in our group a few different times about how most of us as writers seem to love writing with lots of light and noise, where others want absolute silence and dim lights. So when you actually get to putting your work to paper, do you prefer one to be out there or over here?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I actually have a really hard time sitting down to write because my life is so busy. And I still have kids at home, and I have a full-time job, and I have this editorial gig, and I have my own writing, and I work on music, and so the fact that I also want to go outside occasionally means my life is really full. And so in recent years, I have started doing twice yearly writing retreats, just for 5 days at a time, where I go out to Emrys farm, or I go get myself an Airbnb north of Putney, and I do nothing during that time except read and write really intensively, because I can do it really intensively, because I don't usually do it otherwise. Like, I can't read a book. I have to only listen to what I can get on audiobook and listen to in the car or while I'm cooking. So to actually hunker down and work, it's less like I need a certain ambiance and more like I need truly dedicated time, which is also spoiled. So now it's really hard, and I mean, like, forcing myself to write those postcard poems is like pulling teeth. I fell so far behind this August. I was still finishing them into September because I just couldn't sit down once a day and write 5 lines of poetry. So it's kind of a trade-off to give myself the time just to be isolated and focused, but then also not be able to work in any other way. But I do recommend the writing retreat approach if you can actually make the time, because it gives you permission to just do nothing but this.
All right. Could you talk a little more about that postcard project? There are a few poets here, and I think it sounds fascinating. What is the objective? Is it with poets writing to other poets? Or
It's interesting because the way Paul Nelson, who started it, the way he conceives of it is that you can respond to the postcards you get. Those can be your prompts for your next poem, or you can respond to the images on the postcards. A lot of people who do this have started making their own postcards, like the craft of the postcard is part of the fun for them, and they go hunting for postcards in used shops or whatever, so that the image is a prompt for them to write the poem. And so part of it is supposed to be the discipline of just writing something down and not editing yourself, not revising it. For me, that's not a good use of my time. I want to write it in a notebook and have it for future use, and then edit it just a little as a transcript postcard. And again, I'm always thinking more in a big picture way about what do I want to write about, and how can I work on pieces of it this way. So my approach to it is more like personal discipline, but I think it's fun that I have recruited a number of locals that I know to do it. And sometimes, I mean, my poetry mentor back in Washington State sometimes shows up on my list, as she did this year, and that's delightful because it's hundreds of people participating, and you get a list of 30, 31 for your August batch. And it's a $10 administration fee to participate, and again, you get your list around July 4th, and you begin sending out your postcards anytime. So if you want to spread it out, because you know you'll be like me and not actually be able to do it all in August, you can. But yes, Cascadia Poetics Lab, if you want to look it up on the internet and participate. I've been doing it since 2012, which again was actually probably another part of me really thinking of yourself as a poet that is doing this thing with other poets. And sometimes you get really great things from other people. Sometimes not, but it's still fun just to find something in your mailbox that's not trash. It's personal, even if it's from a person that you've never met or will never interact with in real life. Anything else?
Have you met any other through this postcard exchange where you've kept a relationship with the other person?
No, but I have, well, I shouldn't say no, because a couple of the people who are instrumental in maintaining it and who helped to put together an anthology of poems that were written for this, I follow their poetry on Facebook and, you know, have that level of connection to them. But it is true, though, that I have met other locals whom I didn't previously know, but it turns out other people I know them, where I've ended up, you know, sending a postcard to somebody in the next town or just over the border in Vermont or whatever. Then, you know, working for Literary Mama, I've gotten submissions from people I recognize because they sent me postcard poems. So there is a kind of strange sense of confluence that some of them come back in and you recognize those names. It's poetry community. All right. Well, thank you for having me. So nice to read to human beings.